So think of it this way: fentanyl stretches the value of every illicit street drug that you can think of. It's in the majority of street drugs in general. So what they've done is they've started to produce basically like black market prescription pills. So it looks like a Percocet. You wouldn't tell from the naked eye that it was created in a lab in Mexico, and that it's 5 times as lethal as a Percocet would be, because it has this fentanyl in it. So what it looks like is two 14-year-old boys, let's just say, going out for a Friday night party, and they say, "Hey man, we got some Percocets, or we got some Xanax, or we got this, or we got that." And they smoke a joint or whatever they do, and then they take one of these pills. They start playing video games or something, and then a couple minutes later, one of them drifts off. He's never waking up again.
Welcome to the Christ and Coffee Podcast. My name is Dr. Hiker Lopian, and today we're going to talk about the fentanyl crisis that's plaguing America. According to the CDC, last year, 110,000 drug overdoses happened, where 70+% of those deaths were related to fentanyl. To put that in perspective, the U.S. lost 58,000 people in the Vietnam War. Each year, we're losing more people to fentanyl than war. Fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin. It's easy to make. Many people who take it don't realize they're taking it. And just a little bit is lethal. They say fentanyl is final for those reasons. To talk about this crisis and to wake the church up on how to respond to this crisis, I bring back my friend from the Jersey Shore, Arman. Arman is the author of his memoir, He Calls Me Redeemed, a memoir of childhood sex abuse, heroin addiction, hope, and redemption. You could find it on Amazon. It is a great read of hope in the midst of very extreme addiction. Arman shares his insight on how the church should respond, how we should parent in a world where synthetic opioids are becoming very, very dangerous. Before we begin our conversation, I do want to read our verse of the week, found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15:33. Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. With that said, please grab a cup of coffee and enjoy this very eye-opening conversation. Hey, brother. Welcome back to the Christ and Coffee Podcast. How you been, my friend?
Hey, Hike, what's up, man? Doing great, bro. Thank you so much for having me again. I appreciate it.
Congratulations. You had a kid. Your book's published since we last talked. That's quite an amazing achievements right there.
Oh, thank you, man. Praise God. Yeah. The baby's 6 months old, baby Theo. So it's been, wild and busy, but good busy. And the book has been getting great reception. The Lord is really using it powerfully. I've been to some different events and different things, trying to carve out as much time as I can, obviously, with everything going on. But man, it's been awesome. It's been really awesome.
And thanks for coming back on. And I have a very important question to ask you as we talk about substances. I have to talk about my favorite substance, coffee. Mm-hmm. How do you drink your coffee?
So, I'm Armenian, bro. My favorite coffee has got to be just straight up surge, right? Just, right. Traditional Armenian coffee. But if I'm not making that, what I've been doing lately is when we leave our church, there's a place over right down the street called, what's it called? The name is escaping me, but I get, they have all kinds of specialty coffee. And I've been getting, there's either they sell Kona coffee or Jamaican Blue Mountain, it's super expensive, but considering the cost of a cup of coffee when you go out to a Starbucks or wherever, it's actually not that expensive. So it's like $40 a pound for this coffee, but
right.
I get like half a pound and it lasts me quite a while. I make one cup in the morning before I leave the house. I make it in the Nespresso machine, and that's been my go-to lately. How about you?
Would you prefer the Hawaiian or the Jamaican Blue Mountain?
I like the Jamaican Blue Mountain, man. It's like you could drink it black and it still tastes good. It's not bitter or acidic. It's really, really nice.
Amazing stuff. I do want to talk to you because I'm kind of oblivious, and I know many other people probably are, specifically with this fentanyl crisis. Is it a crisis? What's going on? What is going on?
Oh my gosh, man. Yeah. It is a crisis, and not only is it a crisis, but I'll put it to you this way. Fentanyl is now the number one cause of death for American adults ages 18 to 45.
Wow.
That's mind-boggling, and it's slowly, taking effect in ages 14 and under. I mean, it's been killing, those age groups for a while, but it's getting more and more prevalent in those age groups as the drugs become more accessible and they make them more palatable for young children with colorful pills and all kinds of different ways that they have to do that. It's beyond a crisis, bro. It's you're talking 100 and what was the number? 112,000. I wish I had the specific number because every one of those people is a soul, a child of God, created in God's image that have been, I would say, poisoned, a lot of them. Out of that 112,000, 70% of that is fentanyl. Just to give you that, so that's drug overdoses for 2023, I believe is the correct number, and 70% of that 112 plus thousand is fentanyl. Just to give you an idea of how dangerous and how horrific what we're looking at is.
So I really am gonna play dumb here. What is it exactly?
So, I'll give you a brief. Basically, we've had three major waves of opioid crisis in the United States. The first one was, think, Civil War era. You're talking amputees and people that were, injured during the war. They were getting addicted to morphine. So a German scientist had isolated morphine from the opium sap that they take from the opium plant. When that scientist did that, it created an epidemic of morphine abuse in the United States during that time. During the height of that wave of opioid epidemic in the United States, what happened was the Bayer company, Bayer aspirin, they decided that they were going to market heroin as a safer alternative, less overdoses, less risk of dying from heroin. The morphine crisis that I was talking about, the doctors really used, their business model was you had to be injected by a doctor. People were coming 2, 3, 4 times a day to get injected with morphine. A lot of housewives, at the same time that these Civil War soldiers were fighting, they were getting addicted to heroin as well, or morphine rather, excuse me. So then the next wave was when Bayer started marketing heroin as a safer alternative. They put that into tablets, and that became a huge problem in the United States as well. It was not any safer than morphine. As a matter of fact, heroin is a lot more potent and stronger. Just to give you an idea, fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine and 50 times stronger than heroin. But yeah, the country was in a situation where they were being decimated by addiction, and there was a lot of immigrants. Let's just say, picture New York City, the early 1900s, a lot of like street toughs and gangsters that were crushing up these heroin tablets and snorting them, and they got addicted that way. After that, what happened, the next wave that really came was the inner cities in the 1970s. A lot of low-income communities getting hit hard with heroin that was cut many, many times. And so because it was cut so many times with, all kinds of different things that they cut the drugs with to stretch the quantity, it was really only effective by injection. So it really was affecting specifically the inner city communities. Then it brings us to like 1996, where the Sackler family, which was a very powerful family, started marketing OxyContin. And when they started marketing that drug, and the doctors around the country just started prescribing it like it was candy, it was the solve every problem drug. It was anytime there's any pain or pain management, they were prescribing OxyContin. And there was a very parallel effect from the prescription drug use to illicit street drug use. So while the prescription drugs were being sold out of pharmacies, people were getting hooked onto OxyContin, Percocet, etc., and then they were getting desperate and going toward street drugs that were cheaper and more accessible. And that's what we're seeing right now is the overflow of everything that happened from 1996 on. What we're looking at now with fentanyl, to go back to your original question, like what is fentanyl?
So just to backtrack everything, you're giving a huge kind of like summary of this is like nothing new. It's just a new form of a new medication gone wrong.
Yeah,
what we're talking about. So
that's kind of where I'm going. Yep.
And then morphine was there to help. We still use morphine pretty predominantly, right? In the hospitals, I assume.
They do still use morphine. Yeah.
So then they were like, all right, we need something stronger, more potent. Then heroin was created. And then now you have these pain pills, and now like it's like the evolution of all these sort of pain management is getting us to the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah. So the fentanyl itself, I read a book called Fentanyl Inc. And I don't know if I'm not, marketing the book or anything, but it was a great book. It was a really, really great book. It was written by a guy named Ben Westhoff. I read it last year, so I forget a lot of what I read. But what I really took away from it was an interesting story because he basically, what he did was he went into China. He went into Wuhan, China, and he went all over the country to research fentanyl use and see what the causes were, et cetera. He went to Wuhan, China, and he was going to these basically industrial parks. If you can picture, Wuhan, they're going to these industrial parks. They go in to an office building, woman sitting at the desk, everything's nice and clean. And he says, I need, this much of this chemical, this much of this chemical. And these are the precursors that are being used to manufacture fentanyl. So, it's being produced in China, a lot of it, and then being shipped through Mexico, coming across our border. What started happening was the cartels, they started to make their own makeshift labs. Rather than buying it direct from China, they started buying the precursors. So China started selling the precursors that were used to produce fentanyl in these makeshift labs. Because the labs are not up to par and, however they're doing it is not... There's no protocols that are being followed, et cetera. It's 1 kilo of fentanyl is enough to kill 500,000 people. So just to give you an idea, you could sell cocaine all day long. You're never going to kill with a kilo of cocaine anywhere close to 500,000 people. Just not possible, So that's how potent and how dangerous and how lethal fentanyl is. They say enough, it's literally like they show pictures online, a pencil with the tip of the pencil, just a little bit of fentanyl on the top is enough to overdose on.
That's insane. So just to like process everything, there's this investigative journalist guy. He goes to China and Wuhan, where the COVID's from, right? He is like seeing that these chemical companies that are pharmaceutical companies in China giving kind of the bare bones that's needed to create the drug. A lot of it's going from China to Mexico, and the cartels are kind of finalizing the form of fentanyl, and then they're sending it over to these states, and it's just flooding the market, and a small dosage of it is just killing people. So like people are not even aware that they're consuming it or smelling it, because how potent? You said it's like, how potent is it? Like if you just like open a box of it it's an airborne. Are you? Is that it, or like how does this work? I'm really dumb with all.
No, it's okay. How
does like one get poisoned by it? Use the word poisoned.
Well, let me put it to you this way: if God forbid, let's say if you have a teenage son or daughter, and you come in their room one night and they're blue. They're something just happened, but they're still breathing, but you could tell that they're in real danger. You call the police. They get the ambulance over there. They will not let you touch your child for the risk of you touching the child and becoming also infected or affected rather by the fentanyl itself and you perishing because of just touching the skin of your dying child. That's happened over and over and over again. And what it really looks like is what they're doing is they're manufacturing it and making prescription pills. So think of it this way: fentanyl stretches the value of every illicit street drug that you can think of. It's in the majority of street drugs in general. So what they've done is they've started to produce basically like black market prescription pills. So it looks like a Percocet. You wouldn't tell from the naked eye that it was created in a lab in Mexico, and that it's 5 times as lethal as a Percocet would be, because it has this fentanyl in it. So what it looks like is 2 14-year-old boys, let's just say, going out for a Friday night party, and they say, "Hey man, we got some Percocets, or we got some Xanax, or we got this, or we got that." And, they smoke a joint or whatever they do, and then they take one of these pills. They start playing video games or something, and then a couple minutes later, one of them drifts off. He's never waking up again. And this is happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times over and over and over again across our entire country, and it's been happening for a number of years now.
Wow. As a former heroin dealer and addict, what does this look like in retrospect to that awful drug? Like, what's the comparison? What's the mind of the drug dealer, and then what's the mindset of an addict when it comes to this stuff?
Yeah. So, one thing that made me think of when you asked that question was back in the day when I was on the street and selling dope or buying dope. If we found out, because they're all stamped with a particular stamp, so say one might say Louis Vuitton on it, or another one might say Blue Magic, or another one might say Captain Crunch. So they come up with all these different logos and they put them on the bags. And so when a particular stamp comes into town, let's say if it's a new stamp on the bags, let's just say, for example, it's the Captain Crunch logo on a bag. And you find out that particular stamp on the bag obviously has nothing to do with the company. So I'll just say that because I don't want to but let's just say that you find out that somebody overdosed on that stamp. When the word hits the street that it's causing overdoses, people run out to get that stamp, because that stamp now means that that's a potent drug. So in the mind of an addict, the one that you heard overdose, he just didn't know what he was doing. She just didn't know what she was doing. So it makes it more popular. So when you hear, oh my gosh, people are over.
The opposite, but that makes sense.
Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. So if you hear an overdose, that's good branding, versus the opposite, where it's like your product doesn't want to be touched.
Yeah, so that's how it was when I was, back in the day when I was, doing my thing and whatever. But now fentanyl is a completely different animal. I'm so far removed. I've been walking with the Lord for 15 years now.
That's great.
So praise God for that. But I still do go speak at like the rescue mission in Asbury Park, and I still do talk to people that are battling fentanyl addiction, et cetera. Really, the addiction, it doesn't seem any. What really seems different to me is not the level of how much a person is addicted to the drug. So heroin versus fentanyl. I think I think they would be comparable as far as that's concerned. You're addicted to something, your entire life from morning to night is focused on doing that drug, and there's nothing else that's going to give you any kind of peace. So whether it's crack, whether it's heroin, whether it's fentanyl, whatever it is, that's going to remain, for the most part, the same disastrous, spiritual prison that you're going to be in. But I think the real difference between fentanyl and heroin is the level at which people are dying. Because heroin, there was overdoses. There's always going to be overdoses, but nothing like this. This is completely out of control. This is, I remember the Sinaloa cartel last year. I remember hearing a news reporting that the head of the Sinaloa cartel, they were putting out warnings to these gangs and saying, for people, they were giving warnings that if you continue to sell fentanyl, you're killing all our customers, essentially. So they were giving warnings, we're going to start killing you because you're going to make it so that we can't make money anymore. They got so greedy cutting these illicit drugs with fentanyl that now they've gotten so greedy that it's killing everybody.
Wow. So this is where that curve stops, because it's like you said, you're killing the customers from that mindset.
Absolutely.
Let's go into the mind of the addict. So you hinted at that, like, it seems very similar. It's just the stuff is extra potent, right? There's this whole, like, what leads, is there a correlation to addiction, or you could stumble upon this and all of a sudden you have that one one hit and that you're set for life? Like, what's your thought with the addict point of view now?
So there's such like a wide range of subjects to talk about regarding this, because, you have, like in my case, right, childhood trauma from the childhood sexual abuse and things like that come into play, from your mental state to your environment to just all kinds of different avenues that you could go down to say, why does a person decide to do these things, right? I will say with fentanyl, a lot of the people that are dying, they're not street addicts. They're not people that have been addicted to fentanyl for a long time. They're kids that just got something, the wrong thing. They got peer pressured into taking something, like I said, on a Friday, Saturday night at a party, and that was it for them. So it's become so much more accessible. But the cause of addiction, how does that happen? Basically, we all have dopamine, right? Dopamine release happens when we have a good slice of Sicilian pizza, and you say, "Oh my gosh," it floods your brain with dopamine. I'm using that as an example because I am myself a Sicilian pizza addict, so I can, But whether it's that, whether it's having a cup of coffee, whether it's any number of different things that we do releases regular levels of dopamine. If you kiss your wife, if you have a good afternoon with your kids, this all releases a normal level of dopamine. And what it's meant to do by God's design is to draw you into doing whatever that activity is again. Hey, this is a good thing. This brings joy. This brings a good feeling. Let's do this again, right? That's what it's meant for, a motivation, a natural motivation. What happens with a drug like heroin or fentanyl is that you do the drug and it floods your brain with copious amounts of dopamine. It's incomparable to any other thing that we have naturally in life. It's a counterfeit peace. It's a counterfeit happiness or joy that you feel. So when a person, again, there's all these different avenues, whether it's childhood trauma or anything else that we're talking about. People go through all kinds of things. But when a person is longing for peace and their life is nothing but chaos, and they do something that just overwhelms them with this feeling of peacefulness and joy that they've never felt or haven't felt in many years, it's extremely addictive. And it becomes, it gets to a point in a person's life. If you read, what chapter would it be in my book? Chapter 8, I would say if you read 2 chapters in my book, He Calls Me Redeemed, a memoir of childhood sex abuse, heroin addiction, hope, and redemption. Hike, I know we talked all about it on the last podcast. I know underneath below there'll be links to the book, but I mentioned that because in those 2 chapters, I really describe how I got to the point where I started shooting heroin and how I felt when the first time I shot dope. And you really get a sense of why a person would get hooked on something like that, and that it becomes every fiber of their being, every second of their day is focused on getting this drug. There's nothing else. It's just that.
Wow. And what's scary here, like you said, it's just someone's taking this accidentally, and it's so lethal, so potent. Any advice for parents on what to communicate? Like, you can't trust any substance. You're just
can't.
What would be your advice for parents who might be frightened by this invasion of poisonous fentanyl? So
I think parents across the board. I have 3 boys. They're still all very small, but my oldest is going to be 8 soon. And I think parents across the board, right? I'm going to give advice generally, but believers specifically, I think very much in the same vein of the talks that we're having earlier and earlier with our children about sexuality, about godliness and purity when it comes to how they're going to live their life in regards to their sexual lifestyle and identity and all these different things. And, we're seeing the world is turned upside down and it's absolute insanity, right? So we're having to talk to our children earlier and earlier because there are things that they're questioning and they need to know the answers, and we have to give them the answers before they get it from the world. I would say very much in the same vein of that, we need to be talking to our kids, having the conversations. My son, he asked me today what the podcast was going to be about, and he put his hands on my shoulders and he prayed for me, for the podcast. And I told him what the subject was about. And his prayer was, God, please use the podcast to save so many people so that they don't drink drugs. That's what he said to me. So that they don't drink drugs and they don't die, because we want them to live, Lord. And, hearing a 7-year-old pray that, but you got to be talking to your kids. You have to be warning them, obviously. Now it's a different warning because drugs, like I said, they're coming in colorful packages, and they're putting drugs in little gummies and all kinds of different things. So we have to be warning our kids, hey, don't, even just to be overly precautious, don't take any candy that anybody would offer you or that you find, in somebody's house. If you even because of marijuana and THC, because they're putting a lot of that in little candies and stuff now. So a kid could go over their uncle's house. Maybe your house is Christian household. There's no drugs. There's no nothing for them to take like that. But they go to their uncle's house or their aunt's or this one or that one, and they find a little bag of gummies, and they decide to take a few just because. They even have to be careful of that now because you just don't know, So I think the first thing is the conversation with younger ones, the warning, right? And telling them about these things and explaining that thousands of people are dying. Explain to them that it's the number one killer of Americans ages 18 to 45 and moving slowly lower and lower and lower down the age group. So giving them those warnings. The older kids, it's all about the conversation about choices. I mean, there's a road that's going to lead you to death and destruction and pain and anguish, chaos, confusion. And then there's a very much more narrow road, right? That we know that Jesus talked about, that's going to lead to life. And few find that road. And that's going to lead to life and peace and joy and blessing. So we got to explain these two roads to them and give them the binary choice. Do you want death and destruction, or do you want life and peace? And do you want to live out God's calling for your life? Do you want to see the people around you be blessed by you and by the way you're living? Or you want to go down this other road? And I think the explanation to them has to be how quickly this can happen. This can happen in an instant, that you destroy your entire life, that you're gone, and God forbid you take the wrong thing and it ends every hope and dream that your parents ever had for you. And then they have to live the rest of their lives struggling with that loss. It's a very heavy thing. So it needs to be talked about. There has to be warnings. And beyond that, I would just say lastly that I'm going to say this, definitively, there is no hope other than Jesus Christ for this crisis that we're facing and for every other crisis that we see happening in our country right now. We can talk, we can warn them, we can have conversations, but without the blood of Jesus covering our children, I think that you can do all the right things, and there's a lot of evidence of this. You can do all the right things throughout their entire life, send them to Christian schools, bring them to Bible studies, go to church every Sunday, have these conversations, and still fentanyl will find your child. So, I think that, it's a horrific situation that Jesus is the only answer for.
Yeah, I was preaching 6 months ago at my church, and while I was preaching, the Lord delivered someone of, he just had this euphoric feeling of the Spirit, pretty much, and it was connected to some anger issues, but he felt like he was floating in the sky, so filled, and, he came up to me, he goes, "This is the greatest experience I have ever experienced. I used to take a whole bunch of drugs. Nothing is comparing to this euphoric moment right now." And I'm like, that's pretty cool, God.
Amen.
But like you said, I 100% agree. Jesus is really the way here, because it's not just, the fearful preventive measures, which we all need to take. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that. But like you said, with something like this, it's not like the story of they made all the wrong choices. This is just an accident that could happen, or just one mistake could happen, and it's lethal consequences. And that's why we need the protection of the Lord as well, for our kids, praying those prayers of protection, and then also praying for the country and for the solution for this. Am I assuming correctly? America is probably the main country that deals with this, but it's going to eventually spread elsewhere because it's relatively new.
100%. Yeah. So United States is the number one. We're the number one consumers of every horrific thing that you can think of, whether it be child pornography, whether it be illicit drug use, whether it be whatever it is. We're the number one consumers of it, unfortunately. But yes, so we're the number one consumers of fentanyl. It is in other countries as well. The other dangerous thing I didn't mention before is kids are buying it online. So
wow.
Whether it's Craigslist, whether it's Instagram, whether it's whatever website, there's codes that kids use so that they're able to kind of speak in code, and then they just ship it in the mail. So you get a FedEx in the mail, and it has your fentanyl in it, or it has whatever it is that you were, acid or this or that, whatever you were looking for. And there's a ton of drug dealers that are online and making it. The government can't keep up. I mean, you're not gonna. It's like an octopus, there's many tentacles. So it's a really difficult thing to get under control. It's an impossible thing to get under control, really.
Wow. What would you say is the church's role in all this?
Well, so, the two things that we were talking about, right, is fentanyl. You got the kid that never really did drugs before and just makes the wrong choice, and that could be it for him. And then you have people that have been addicted for many years, right? So that's another issue that we're talking about. And I think, I'll just use my story as a catalyst or an example for what needs to happen. And, when I went to detoxes, I went to rehabs all over New Jersey, New York. And
this is for heroin. So it's like the 50% less potent version of modern day fentanyl. Is that what
correct?
You said, right?
That's correct. Yes. And I was completely strung out on heroin for a very long time, and just a complete disaster, just a total disaster in every way that you can think of. And I went to a ton of detoxes and rehabs. Like I said, I was locked up a few times for a few short little, I never did any time, like I mentioned in the last podcast. I want to make that clear. So, but I did get arrested a few times, and none of that did anything to help me. And any attempt that I made on my own of trying to get clean or do the right thing, just couldn't make any headway, couldn't make any progress, just completely hopelessly addicted to this drug. And it wasn't until I gave my heart to Jesus Christ one night in a psychiatric ward after almost committing suicide that Jesus came into my life. He absolutely transformed me in every conceivable way that you could think of, and my life began to take a turn, and I began to experience victory in my life. But along with that victory were a lot of great people that were surrounding me, people that kept me accountable, and people that that poured into me, that taught me about Scripture, that I spent a lot of time alone with the Lord, a lot of time reading the Word, studying, and meditating on what the Word said. And so I think the church's response has to be like the Good Samaritan's response when he stopped on the side of the road and gave care to the man who had been beaten almost to death. There's a tendency to look from a distance across the street at a drug addict, and I don't want to get involved. I don't want to get too close. Just on a very practical level, when you walk outside the convenience store and there's a guy out there and he's crying, or he looks like he's been through hell and back, maybe just stop and ask him, "Hey, brother, you okay? Can I get you something? Do you need any food?" And then let that lead you into a moment where you can pray with him, and then have in your back pocket the resources. There's going to be a local Christian program by God's grace somewhere that you can point him to, or that you can safely somehow arrange a ride for him to and from that place to get him into some type of a Christian program where he can, just like I did, get to know Jesus and give his heart to him, and start to get into the Word and meditate on what's true, and replace every horrible thing in his life with good things. So I think the church's role is doing what we can to pray for people, obviously, make people aware, educate ourselves, don't be scared to minister to those who are in need. And like I said, have a follow through, not just praying for them, not just buying them some food or something to drink, but then following up with, hey, do you know Jesus Christ? And would you need a ride to a program that I could get you in? If I could get you in a program, would you be willing to go? Make sure it's a Christian program. And I think that is our role. I think that's the only hope, is leading people to Jesus,
Yeah, well, amen to that. No, that's huge, because I it took me a while after doing ministry in New York to actually have like those pamphlets in the back of my pocket, because there's always the talk among Christian circles. Should I give $1 to a homeless man? What if he buys it for booze? And it's just like, I think what you're talking about is really the heart of it, And oftentimes you could tell, like, sometimes the homeless people already know where all the spots is, and they're trying to take advantage. And then there's other times where they actually don't know the spots because it's all fresh, and then you give it the resource, and it makes all the difference. And the earlier you're able to connect them, the better. I think we just simplify drug addiction, we simplify homelessness, we simplify motives and stuff. We're not responsible for all that. We're responsible to act in the manner you're just talking about, and then that's quite remarkable.
Absolutely. And I think, obviously tithing to our local churches is important, but I think even, in that same vein, talking about trusting the Lord to do with that resource, regardless of, I'll use this as an example. So in chapter, I think it's chapter 6 of my book. I should really know my book a little bit, but I think it's in chapter 6 that I tell the story about my father and I. He was a carpet installer when I was a kid. Armenian, surprise, surprise. We're in the carpet business. And, I would go on jobs with him. And I remember those early winter mornings, getting in the van and, going down the street. There was a convenience store. We'd go in. My uncles are there. My dad, we're talking to the store owner. Then we'd walk out, and there's a homeless guy, and he's begging for change or asking for money. And, people would be blowing him off and just getting in their car. And my dad would always give, And I said to my dad, I asked him, and I tell the story in the book. I said, Dad, why don't those other people give him money? And my uncles joked, and they said, because they know he's going to buy booze with it, And they chuckled a little bit, and I said, well, Dad, then why do you give it? Like, why do we give him money? And he said he buys food too, Yavrik, and he also needs. He needs things just like everybody else needs things. He just has this thing weighing him down, and everybody's got to score sometimes, he told me. So, but yeah, it's to your point,
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the legal aspects? What can the government do? Is there like you said, this is an octopus. People are literally going online. It's coming. It looks like a prescription drug. What are your thoughts on legalization of drugs in general?
So I would say the two things to maybe talk about there is the legalization part is an interesting one because, gosh, it's tempting. I mean, I'm not talking about legalizing it in general, but just when you go down that rabbit hole and you start listening to interviews and doing research, and just an example, maybe you'll find like some part of like Norway or something where they are just handing people out drugs and giving them a building where, hey, just shoot up here and it's all good. And it looks like a utopia, and everybody's just, it's like, so what I mean when I say it's tempting is that if you start to go down that rabbit hole and read and research, you're going to get a skewed version of, what's really true, just like so many other things in our society now, right? In media, and there'll be a certain picture being sold to you. But in general, I'm completely against legalization. I don't have any reason to believe that legalizing drugs would do anything but make it more prevalent and more dangerous and more accessible. So if you think about it this way, just common sense wise, right? This is how I like to think about things. If we're in our house and we tell our kids, hey, you're not allowed to eat cookies. We're no cookies today. We had too much sugar this weekend. No cookies, right? You have control over that, and maybe they sneak a cookie, maybe they don't, but it makes it a little bit harder for them. Now, if we say, hey, we're going to give you unlimited cookies. Here's the cookies. They're on the table. Take as many cookies as you want, and you get a group of kids, what's going to happen, right? So, I mean, just common sense wise, legal versus illegal. But, I think that people look at like prohibition and things that we have in our history to say like, hey, no, if you make this illegal, you're going to create this whole black market for it. It's going to make it even worse. They're doing it with pot now. Obviously, pot's legal, and
Yeah, they just allowed for pot cafes like in Amsterdam and California.
Yeah. So, and I remember going to Amsterdam back in the day, and now thinking of that in the United States is like wild for me to think about. But that's I guess something of a test case, because there's still a lot of legal marijuana coming into the country. It's not like there's not a black market. It's not like there's not a demand for black market marijuana to come through into the country. So that's the one thing I would say regarding legalization. I'm no expert when it comes to that, but just my general feeling on it, just my common sense.
And it's interesting about the drugs we've been talking about because they were legal, right? It's just it's like, wait a minute, these painkillers are a bad idea. This heroin is a bad idea. The fact that it's coming from the aspirin company, that's new to me. And then there's getting to the point of like, no, this legal substance is so bad we have to now deem it illegal because of the damage it's caused legally. We didn't know the effects of it.
What I do think that the government needs to do, when I talked earlier about the different epidemics that have hit our country, somewhere around 1914, if I'm not mistaken, the federal government got involved because it became such an issue that they got involved. And that's when the federal government got involved, that's when it reduced some of what was happening with the drug epidemic of that time. We all are seeing what's happening with the border. Everybody has different feelings on it, wide spectrum of opinions. And, I know a lot of our listeners are Armenian, so we like the idea of immigration. We like the idea of people coming and starting a new life here and, and really becoming successful in this country. Like we want to see that, but we want to see it legally, obviously. And what we're seeing is thousands and thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants crossing the border and creating havoc like we've never seen before. And the border is porous, and it's allowing for everything that we're talking about, whether it's fentanyl, we're talking about human trafficking and different things. I don't know if you saw Hayek, I think it was a day or two ago, there was a bunch of migrants that crossed like I don't know if it was 95 freeway in like near San Diego. And they were trying to hijack this bus, if the reports are correct, a school bus. So when we have things like this happening that are just so, it's mind-boggling that we're watching it in the United States in 2024. But I think, as far as the government is concerned, like we need an administration, we need a government that's willing to crack down and keep our borders secure, because if we don't, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Yeah. Especially with this issue with it coming from Mexico, and that's not up for debate. It doesn't matter what your political leaning is. This is where it's coming from: China, Mexico to America.
Yeah, I would say it's not a red or blue issue; it's a red, white, and blue issue, as they say. It's all Americans should be on board with protecting our country, protecting our youth, protecting our families, and everything we hold dear. We just can't have what's happening happen. I mean, if you think about it this way, I always think about this whenever we do the 9/11 ceremony on TV. When they are giving honor to those who lost their lives that day, September 11th. They read off the names one by one, and it's like haunting to hear the names.
Right.
One after the other after the other. You think about these lives. If they were to get on camera and read every name that has been poisoned or overdosed from fentanyl, one after the other after the other, I want you to think about just the last 5 years. It's 100,000 at least on average, because it's been 102, 103,000, 107,000 per year for the past, like 5 years or something like that. I think this year, actually, there was a decrease, if I'm not mistaken, in overdoses due to fentanyl. But you're still talking massive amounts of people. But picture if they got on camera and started reading name after name after name During that talk that I sent you where I gave the workshop at my church on suicide and addiction and depression, I had one clip in the intro where it was like a wall of pictures of people that overdose from fentanyl, and the pictures just don't end. It's face after face after face. 12-year-old kids, 13-year-old kids, 14-year-old kids, and they're gone forever, and nobody's ever going to see or hear from them again, and nobody's ever going to know what God was going to do with their lives, because this drug stole their lives, quite frankly, and it's devastating to think about. But 100,000 people, I mean, think about what we're talking about. That's over the last 5 years, you're talking 500,000 people.
That's wild. That is wild. And I think, like you said, if we humanize this, not just a statistic, it's mind-boggling every year, that many people, and the scale of this could get really worse if we're not on top of it, especially with the potency and the accidents, and it's just wild to think about. Yeah, but like you said, I think Jesus is the only solution to this. But it's just nothing new under the sun. It's like these drugs is just evolving to get more potent, more scary, more secretive, easier to obtain. That's nothing new, but it's just the science behind these is kind of next level.
There's a place over in Philadelphia called Kensington, and if you go over there, right, what they were finding was there was literally like a drug that was eating the flesh of sort of taking it, and it's like huge wounds all over their arms, and they're noticing it, and it's, they continue to use the drug because they just can't stop. What they were doing, they were calling it tranq, and they were using a drug called xylazine, and it's an animal tranquilizer. And what they were doing, because it was super cheap, was they were cutting the drugs not only with fentanyl, because that's not enough, but they were using this xylazine, and it was putting people in this like zombie-like state. They looked like they were just looking through you when they're looking at you, hunched over, nodding out, but then also eating their flesh. So the emergency rooms in the hospitals were inundated with people coming in, and they're having to treat these wounds now on top of everything else they have going on. And they said that the majority of the United States heroin/fentanyl supply will have this xylazine in it at some point. So they're looking to the future and prognosticating that they're going to have this drug, xylazine, be another huge issue, because it's going to be in the drug supply in the United States. And just quickly, because I don't want to forget, when we said before, what's the church's response? And we talk about Jesus being the answer. I was just going to say, a lot of times, every one of us has talked to somebody that we know that maybe is a Christian but hasn't been plugged into a church, and we're trying to encourage them, hey, you should be part of a local church, and you should be part of a congregation, and here's the reasons why. And I want us all to get into this mindset of not going to church just for you, right? Just to be served and just to sit there and listen to the sermon. We are going for that. We are going to worship and all of the obvious things. But I cannot tell you how many times, just as a regular person going into church that day, not expecting anything but just a regular Sunday, and somebody, brings me to the side and says, hey, can you talk to my daughter? Can you talk to my son? They're going through this. Can you call my nephew? And there's been phone calls, and there's been emails, and there's been all kinds of different opportunities that the Lord has given me to be able to speak to people and try to direct them to Keswick, where I went, or the Asbury Park Rescue Mission, or Teen Challenge, or any of these other places where people can go and give their hearts to Jesus Christ and get clean. So I'm just saying, on a practical level, let's be part of the body, and let's go to church expecting that God is going to use us in those type of ways. And the church's response just needs to be practical, like I said before, again, just reiterating it, praying for the people, giving, I'm not talking about giving your entire bank account, but giving some needs if there's some needs, using wisdom and using discernment, not giving money to supply somebody's habit, but, helping to be the hands and feet of the Lord,
Amen. I mean, you might have just answered it, but my final question is, what would be that main message for the church in America?
Yeah, I think again, everything has to begin and end with the gospel of Jesus Christ. I believe as a Christian that there is no other answer to the ills that we're facing in this country and throughout the world. And gosh, by the day, man, it's getting more and more insane. So the answer has to be the gospel. The answer has to be Jesus Christ. But on a practical level, as far as action, we've talked about some of that. I don't know if I wish that there were more places like, I'm gonna just sing the praises of Keswick Colony of Mercy, where I went initially to get clean after I got saved. Christian programs have just I don't know the exact numbers, way higher rate of success when it comes to staying sober, because they're becoming new creations in Christ Jesus. They're not just trying to stop a drug. All I wanted to do initially was just not do heroin anymore. I didn't know how much more the Lord had for me. I didn't know that he was going to give me a family, a wife. I didn't know that he was going to have me write a book or to be used in a million other ways by him to try to help in other ways in people's lives. But I think on a practical level, I would love to see more Christian programs throughout the country. I know that that's like, okay, yeah, well, how are we going to do that? It takes money and it takes a lot of things. There are programs already established, so maybe build on those. Maybe we use some of our resources and donate to the ones that we've vetted, that we know are good organizations. Keswick Colony of Mercy is the oldest live-in rehabilitation center in the entire country. It was started in the late 1800s. It saved, I don't want to give a number, at least hundreds, thousands, I would venture to say, because it's been around for such a long time, of men. And now they have a women's program as well for women who are facing addiction. And I know women come in there and, they have kids. They've been separated from their kids. I did a radio show last year with a girl from, I think she was from Virginia, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that. But she was addicted to methamphetamine, separated from her kids, everything else. She got saved, and next thing you know, started seeing her daughter again, and then got custody back, and now her and her daughter are living this life, and she's a believer, and she's plugged into her local church, and there's just so much that can be done. Maybe build upon the programs that are already there, that are reputable, legitimate Christian rehabilitation centers, and just try to use our resources wisely to help those places.
No, that's great advice, because I wish I knew. I wish when I started ministry 10 years ago that I would jump on that suggestion right away, versus trying to do that. Just to be aware what organizations that I could be the bridge to. All right, we have someone who's struggling with this. I know where to direct them, and then in the meantime, be that sense of community to help with the isolation and loneliness. Is huge for the church. And like you said, every Christian needs to step up and to play their part. And we can't just kind of think that God can't use us. God will definitely use us. It's just, we got to be willing.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing just to hear your testimony again and again, and the good things that God has done for a hopeless situation. There's always hope when it comes to Christ. And thank you for your knowledge on this issue. I've learned a lot, and I know our listeners definitely learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time, Arman. I look forward to connecting in the future. And I want to just now thank all you listeners for tuning in to the Christ and Coffee podcast. Remember to stay caffeinated, my friends, and know that God loves you. See you next week. God bless you. And that's it. Take care.